Super Smash Bros. Brawl, the black sheep of the franchise, still has a lot of fans. Those who grew up with it remember the huge cast of newcomers, the ton of single-player content, the random tripping, the utter dominance of Meta Knight. Okay, not all of it was rosy, but still. Have you ever thought about everything that went into making such a unique entry in the series? Have you wondered how things could have gone differently? A few months ago, we took a look at an alternate timeline, one where the first two Smash Bros. Titles made different decisions and ended up with rosters unlike the ones we know. I'll be your guide as we continue along this timeline into the creation of the third Smash title, one not inherently better or worse than ours, merely different. Follow me and ponder the question, what if Super Smash Bros. Brawl had taken a different path? First, let us travel to the summer of 2007. Nintendo's newest home console had taken off way better than anyone expected, and heading into the E3 convention that year, they had a lot to show off. Super Mario Galaxy, Wii Fit, and others, including some DS games. But their biggest announcement had already been teased a year earlier. The Wii was getting its own Smash Bros. Title. And as that trailer began, showing the huge graphical upgrade, revealing newcomers in Meta Knight and Pit, the excitement was palpable. But then, something happened in that trailer that did not in our timeline. Instead of Samus or Wario appearing, a wave of dark magic blew across the halberd. If you remember from last video, Ganondorf did not appear in this timeline's version of Melee, which made the Demon King one of this alternate Brawl's most requested newcomers. Despite not being a Falcon clone here, Ganondorf had a few familiar traits. Still very slow, very heavy, and very powerful. Still got Flame Choke, as well as the forward tilt that launched a million "This is Sparta" memes. But he also had several moves infused with dark magic, and a few involving the sword he stole from the sage he killed in Twilight Princess, and a neutral special forming a wave of darkness with his hand, damaging nearby foes and reflecting projectiles targeting him, forcing opponents to hit them back. But as Ganondorf fought off Meta Knight and Pit in the trailer, they were disrupted again by a wave of icky paint-like goop. Bowser Jr. jumps into the fight, showing up one game early. Wario was already around from Melee, so here's a different Mario newcomer, and the Royal Brat is built very differently than what we're familiar with. Since his moveset was planned out before he started piloting machines all the time, Jr. fights on foot with subpar mobility, but all sorts of tricks and traps built around his paintbrush from Super Mario Sunshine, like lobbing a paintball for a multi-hit explosion or creating a pool of goop that a piranha plant spawns out of to bite opponents. He also has a few moves that imitate his dad's. Back in the trailer, as the other fighters wiped themselves clean of the paint, some of it gathered around Jr. and... wait, what the... After using his final smash, Bowser Jr. transforms into a completely different fighter. Samus did this gimmick in our timeline, but the devs in this one gave it to a newcomer instead. Playing like a dark mockery of the real deal, Shadow Mario is a little slower, heavier, and has moves that feel off animation-wise, along with some unique stuff, like a forward dive dash attack and a ground pound down air, and paintified versions of Mario specials, like a bouncing paintball instead of a fireball, and an extra messy super gunk punch for recovering with. Upon seeing the reveal trailer for themselves, fans were excited and went right into speculating. Who else might make it this time? With all these villain newcomers, is that going to be the game's main theme? Will there be any cuts this time? But the biggest buzz surrounded what happened at the end of the trailer. Just like in our timeline, Solid Snake showed up as Smash's first ever third-party character, leaving fans everywhere wondering who could be next. Even more exciting was news that it was coming out in December that very year, in North America anyway. And fans wouldn't have to wait long to learn more. The Super Smash Bros. Dojo blog had been running for a while already, but now it would reveal something new about the game every weekday from here on out. And with the release so close, it had a lot of ground to cover in not much time. The dojo reveals early on were pretty familiar, setting the stage, showing characters we already knew about, revealing new details about returning veterans. Mario's down special pulled out Flood now. Link had his Twilight Princess design and the Gale Boomerang and Claw Shot. DDD's down special now used a jet engine built into his hammer. He's been around since the first game in this timeline, remember? A few more returning veterans got confirmed. Bowser, Peach, Ness, Excitebiker, the usual suspects. And after a while, a few newcomers showed up in dojo updates. Ike was not the first revealed this way, since Marth, a mainstay since Smash 64 in this timeline, was on the starting roster. Instead, the honor went to Lucario, running off how popular the character had been since the movie in 2005. Notably, Lucario did not have the damage-based aura mechanic we're so familiar with. And the newcomer revealed second was even more surprising. For Smash's next NES-era Retro Edition? Surprised? In this timeline, Little Mac got in one game early, with a design based on his NES sprites, since the Punch-Out revival was still a couple years away. A simple boxer amidst a roster of larger-than-life figures, Little Mac got a similar setup to his Smash 4 version in our timeline. A powerhouse on the ground, but very weak in the air. With no KO punch mechanic, though, he was simpler and straightforward, meant to capture how satisfying it can feel to overcome the odds and win matches by just punching stuff really hard. A few weeks later, the dojo revealed another newcomer. Or should I say two. Some leftover data in our timeline suggests the Brawl devs considered pairing Dixie Kong with Diddy early on. In this timeline, they liked the idea so much that they made these two the game's big tag team newcomer. Within the duo, Diddy had faster movement, higher jumps, and better grounded combat. Dixie got more range, using her ponytail, and better mid-air combat. Her neutral special fired a bouncing gumball instead of a peanut, and her side special was a mid-air helicopter spin that could even grab opponents. Both Kongs got their team throw from DKC2 as an up special, and their down special swapped which Kong was actively fighting. Wait a minute, you might be thinking. Some of these feel awfully close to stuff characters in our timeline did. Well, Diddy and Dixie did, in fact, out-prioritize someone else. Fans in this timeline would learn years later that the devs considered a Pokemon trainer who would swap between a team of 3, but they chose to go in a different direction. Similarly, Bowser Jr. and Shadow Mario meant Zero Suit Samus never got a serious look, and Little Mac beat out some other retro picks, including Rob. This would have major effects on Brawl's story mode. As autumn went on, the dojo kept revealing additional details. More veterans made their presence known. Ike finally got revealed, along with Olimar and the surprise appearance of Sonic. Well, not surprising for everyone who practically expected him after Snake broke the ice. But with Sonic came some bad news. Brawl was getting delayed, now releasing in late January 2008. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Sakurai and the devs team were making difficult decisions. They feared the game would need even longer to be ready, but Nintendo higher-ups had already lost their patience after having to delay the third Smash game in a row, and would not budge on the new January date. To finish the game in time, further complicated by Sonic getting thrown in mid-development, they needed to cut back behind the scenes. A couple characters were scrapped, modes and features were trimmed back, and the crew called all hands on deck to finish as much as possible on time. This came with consequences. Fans thought they knew just about everything as Brawl's launch day approached. The starting roster included the newcomers and veterans that had, by that point, already been announced, and several more unlockable veterans were quickly found, relieving fans of Luigi, Captain Falcon, and others who irrationally feared they would get cut. But there were a few newcomers also hidden away, left for players to find on their own, mostly because they weren't finished until right before the game was shipped. Turns out, even with the trainer getting rejected, there were still 2 new Pokemon in the game. Lucario's martial arts heavy moveset had inspired Sakurai to give this Ryu of sorts his very own Ken. Yeah, literally. The reason Lucario didn't get the deals more damage at higher percents gimmick? Because it ended up on this standout from Gen 3 instead. Inspired by the Blaze ability all Fire-type starters got starting in Gen 3. But unlike the original Ken, Blaziken got a distinct moveset that got much more up close and personal than Lucario's. An array of kicks and fire-powered strikes fueled a berserker-like aggression that became a fan favorite. Even had specials like Ember as a simple projectile to help open foes up, Blaze Kick, naturally, for a gap-closing burst option, and Sky Uppercut for the obligatory reference. That one wasn't too hard to find and unlock, but there were more newcomers hidden away, the last most players would learn about, with no new stages and few trophies to accompany them, and extra janky coding because they were barely finished in time as is. This trio would become known by fans as the Secret Three. Sakurai always had a knack for noticing under-the-radar characters, even in Smash 64. He gave the surprisingly well-selling Golden Sun a closer look in this timeline, where he found too much moveset potential to pass up, which only got partially utilized. Because the team was pressed for time, the devs yoinked a few moves and animations from Marth and Ike with some adjustments. But Isaac's specials still tapped into his unique Earth Elemental powers. His side special dropped a rock spire on foes from a distance, down planted vines to sprout on command later, and his neutral special summoned a giant psychic hand to forcibly move anyone in his way. Remember this for later. In our timeline, the Brawl team was split between adding Crystal or Wolf, settling on the latter because he was the easier of the two to make. Different priorities in this other timeline led to the opposite decision. Crystal ended up with a mix of ideas from her appearances. Her design came from Star Fox Assault, but she fought with her staff from Adventures and got all of her specials from there, including a spray of ice that could freeze opponents solid, a first in a timeline that never got the Ice Climbers. Sure, several of her moves were pulled from Fox and adjusted for her taller model to save on time, but it worked well enough, kind of. And finally, the mid-2000s were right when Nintendo was trying to get Custom Robo to take off outside Japan. All we saw in our timeline was an assist trophy of the DS game's Ray model. But this timeline pulled a newcomer in based on the GameCube title, because newcomers are chosen earlier than assists are. Ray 01's moveset was an odd combination. The smallest fighter in the game, with mostly short-ranged A moves using gun strikes and the exhaust from his jet-powered feet, an idea that went to Rob in our timeline. Yet his specials pelted opponents with an entire arsenal of blaster fire, artillery bombs, and deployable pods. Sure, time constraints meant their hitboxes didn't always match the animations, but they looked cool. Behold, our alternate roster. Pretty different, isn't it? It's also just a little smaller than the one in our timeline. Same number of slots, one less character overall. Despite the strained dev cycle, they still managed a whopping 17 newcomers total. Also one less than in our timeline. But a lot of characters are missing, huh? Several from our timeline never got a shot. Compared to our version of Brawl, this one's missing Zero Suit Samus, Pokemon Trainer and his trio, Lucas, Rob, Toon Link, and Wolf. Along with the cuts from last episode, this timeline's going off in a whole other direction already. There are also a couple missing from this timeline's version of Melee. Yeah, Suicune and Gooey got cut for time late in development. The former was more expendable when they were already bringing 2 new Pokemon in, and the latter was complicated to render thanks to all those objects he pulled out to attack with. Remember that little detail? What did the fans think? Well, they liked most of the roster. But just like in our timeline, there were a few points of contention. Popular requests like Meta Knight and Ganondorf made it, but many questions and angry forum comments were made about others who didn't get in. Where's King K. Rool? Why is Ridley stuck as a boss? If third parties are eligible, why isn't Mega Man here? What about Banjo and Kazooie? They had leftover code in Melee. And some newcomers got the worst of it. Isaac got hate for being yet another anime-looking pretty boy at a time where Western gaming was just getting out of its edgy phase. Crystal had the gall to be a Star Fox character from after 64, which already had a very vocal fan base, leading some to seethe over her getting in and not Falco or Wolf. But Shadow Mario got the worst of it. For Smash fans in this timeline, this was their first exposure to something resembling a clone character. Despite having some unique moves, many players treated him, and to a lesser extent Bowser Jr., like a waste of a slot. And fans had other thoughts about other aspects of the game, especially the parts where it felt like corners had been cut, which they had been to get it finished in time. The event match lineup was noticeably smaller than Melee's, with only 31 total, 10 fewer than in our timeline, and no unique co-op ones at all. Instead, a 2-player option was stapled onto most regular ones. The trophy lineup hadn't expanded much from Melee. Unlike the 544 in our version of Brawl, this timeline only had 350. The Pokeball and Assist trophy lineup was also smaller. The team members behind those were pulled away to help finish the code elsewhere in the game. And some other single-player content saw some pretty significant cutbacks. But if you remember, there was a whole other side to the Smash community by this point. How did this version of Brawl fare with the competitive scene? Like in our timeline, Brawl had a slower pace and looser movement than in Melee, ostensibly to accommodate motion controls and keep the game from replicating Melee's unwelcoming skill gap. Lower hit stun and mid-air dodges that didn't kill your momentum meant shorter combos, stronger disadvantage states, and a greater focus on neutral situations and stray hits. Feelings about this were very mixed. However, a certain decision changed things compared to our timeline. While tripping still existed as an effect from certain attacks or items, random tripping did not. Instead, the devs made dash dancing weaker by having characters stumble for a second if you pressed back and forth multiple times too quickly, which made movement a little clunkier, but also not prone to losing neutral to pure randomness. As for the characters themselves, the decision to cut content elsewhere gave the team a little more elbow room to apply last-minute balancing, meaning some, but not all, of the most egregious stuff in our timeline was caught and fixed before launch. For reference, here's what our Brawl's tier list looked like in the mid-2010s. Several characters wound up pretty similar to how they are in our timeline. Marth, Pikachu, Wario, Fox, and all the rest of these guys, despite Wario and Kirby still having different side specials from this timeline's Melee. Which brings us to our first top-tier menace. The sheer damage output of Olimar's 6 Pikmin flew under the radar, meaning one of the big S-tier threats was still an extremely campy little spaceman who ran away, tossed Pikmin, and never interacted until you were at kill percents. What about everyone else? Meta Knight got some last-minute nerfs that made several of his moves weaker, laggier, and not transcendent, turning him into an actually balanced, but still good, character. He and Marth became a fan-favorite duo of A-tier swordsmen. Snake's infamous up tilt lost its inexplicable forward hitbox. He also lost several points of weight, no longer the third heaviest character for no apparent reason. But so much of his other stuff was still OP, so he didn't fall far and settled into A tier. Mr. Game & Watch had his bucket break exploit taken out. Unable to halt his knockback in midair in this timeline, he ended up a full tier lower. Lucario lacking the aura gimmick gave him more stability, but less cheese factor. However, this timeline's version of Aura Sphere got slight homing ability based on its perfect accuracy in the games, making it one of Brawl's best projectiles and bumping Lucario up a few spots. Mewtwo was not a late cut in this timeline, but being so big made him susceptible to combos that only worked on big bodies, exposing his low weight and few combos of his own. More glass than cannon, he dropped to the lower tiers. Fellow big body DDD actually gained a few spots despite his standing infinite getting taken out, because most of his worst matchups in our timeline are either weaker in this one or absent entirely. Ness also ended up slightly better. His grab release bug got patched out, meaning certain characters couldn't grab, pummel, and re-grab him infinitely anymore. And Excitebiker, oh boy. Well, the ramp glitch from Melee got fixed. However, his down special, which created a patch of damaging mud in Melee, got changed to an oil slick. That made opponents who touched it trip on the spot. This could happen infinitely for the 15 seconds the slick was active, with no way to remove it, making the biker our second S-tier character, able to make entire sections of the stage untouchable for opponents while he could zoom around freely. As for this timeline's newcomers, thanks to not being a Falcon clone, Ganondorf fared a little better. Unfortunately, he was still slow with bad frame data and not enough power to compensate, condemning him into D tier anyway. But since he wasn't utter trash, a lot of players still had a pocket Ganon. Bowser Jr. ended up, He was smaller and less sluggish than his dad, but while his tools were interesting, none of them were strong enough to get him into the higher tiers. His alter ego, however, with Shadow Mario existing, he and the original got some extra TLC. The real Mario wound up a decent C tier character, while Shadow Mario got all the way into B tier. Not because of his unique moves, because different knockback values on his down throw meant he could chain grab non-floaty characters up to 80%. What about the Kongs? Diddy and Dixie using their down special to swap means Diddy never got the banana peels that made him a menace in our version of Brawl. He ended up a middling C tier. As for Dixie, a lot of her moveset was weaker than her boyfriend's, but she ended up in A tier, because her side special, the helicopter spin, remember, could grab people in midair and toss them. This was the second best edge guarding move in the entire game, able to fling offstage foes into the blast zone at 50% easily. Most players would stick to Diddy most of the time, then swap to Dixie only when they had the advantage. Other newcomers did not fare so well. Turns out having your attacks only get strong when you've taken a lot of damage doesn't work as well when you have to get up close to do much with them. Combined with Brawl's shorter combos, Blaziken just wasn't a serious threat to anyone who could outrange or zone him. Crystal didn't fare any better. Despite being decently fast and borrowing some of Fox's moves, her fairly low damage output and unreliable specials kept her moveset from working as well as it needed to. But even she fared better than poor Little Mac. Turns out being scary on the ground but terrible in the air did not bode well in such an air-focused game. And without a KO punch to cheese stocks with, he fell all the way to the lowest tier. A couple of the late editions fared better though. Remember Ray 01? Turns out a small target with a ton of projectiles whose hitboxes don't match the animations was a problem waiting to happen. He was widely considered a pain in the ass, but only made it to A tier due to notably awful matchups against Fox and Ness. And Isaac? Oh boy. Well, cobbling several of his sword moves from Marth and Ike left some oversights. His forward air hit nearly as hard as Marth's without needing to tipper it, becoming mimetically overpowered and the third best edge guarding move in the game. Because the first best was Move, his neutral special. Remember that? Thanks to janky programming, using it at lower charges made it sometimes push opponents away with no hit stun. Just like Flood, but with forward knockback instead of upward. Once players got the hang of it, a giant windbox in hand form let them shut down linear recoveries effortlessly. In this timeline, Isaac was the best character in the game. Not as unstoppable as our timeline's Meta Knight, but broken enough that some players resented his very presence and hated Golden Sun as a whole by proxy. By the mid-2010s, Brawl's tier list in this timeline looked something like this. There were some shifts over time. At first, Excitebiker was considered the best in the game, until Isaac and Olimar reared their heads. But this is our closest glimpse yet into the metagame in this other continuity. Pretty different, huh? Turns out having a few changes during Brawl's development spun things off even further and made a whole other Smash game than the one we know. Imagine a timeline where Falkendorf was never a thing, but Mother 3 never became more than a cult classic, where Little Mac got in early, but Charizard never got in at all, where Meta Knight and Snake were popular high-tier characters who paled in comparison to a couple of silly little guys, and where Custom Robo and Golden Sun had a presence on the roster, and a lot of players really wished they didn't. How might this timeline play out even further on? Would the two cut characters become badly missed, despite Suicune being terrible in Melee and Gooey being disliked competitively? When fans started learning how to mod Wii games, what would they make for this version of Brawl? Would as many of them even be interested in a project that tried to copy Melee? But we're forgetting something important, aren't we? We went this whole video without talking about Brawl's biggest new addition. Actually, we'll need a whole other video to go over that. Tune in next time as we cover this alternate timeline's alternate version of the Subspace Emissary. You won't want to miss it. Hey, thanks to the following for helping lend a hand with this video. Thanks to my channel supporters as well, patrons and YouTube members both. And if you're a newcomer to this channel, I do a lot of Smash videos with their own twists. Check them out if any pique your interest. So, until next time, hopefully I won't be sick for the next one.